Welcome to a special insider edition of the Upland Nation podcast. I'm Scott Linden, your host. Glad you could join me. Can't wait to talk with this guy. I've run into him, talked with him briefly over the years. You know him. He sends you an email every week or more frequently. That's Steve Snell from Gun Dog Supply. This guy knows a little bit about products, and we'll get some of that, as well as how to take care of dogs, travel with dogs. The guy is an avid hunter, so we'll get lots of insights into that world. It's all coming up right here on this business-oriented industry insider edition of the Upland Nation podcast. I can't wait to talk with Steve, and you will enjoy every bit of what he has to offer. And of course, it's all made possible by our sponsors, Heartland Lodge, Cable Gang's Tie-Out Systems, Mid-Valley Clays and Shooting School, Trulock Choke Tubes, Purina Pro Plan Sport Dog Food, Sage and Breaker Gun Care Products, and Pointer Shotguns. Well, I can't wait to talk more with this guy. We talk in passing. Last time I think was at Pheasant Fest.
Yes, sir.
But a lot of folks out there see your name all the time, but they don't know the guy, and this will be fun for everybody. Steve Snell with Gun Dog Supply joins me from, where are you, Steve?
We're based in Mathiston, Mississippi.
Mathiston, Mississippi. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's quail country to a degree, and
Well, it used to be.
Yeah.
It used to be.
But
We have a few wild birds.
and you venture beyond that quite often, and we're going to talk bird hunting, of course, as well. But before we start on any of that, the old business reporter in me wants to know a little bit more about the company, its origins, what you're doing. There might be somebody out there who's never heard of Gun Dog Supply.
Sure.
So give us the elevator pitch.
We're a family-owned dog supply business. We primarily focus on hunting dogs. I think of us as an upland and waterfowl company, but that's just a small. Well, it's a big part of what we do, but it's not all that we do. We cover pretty much all of the hunting, breeds. We have a lot of hound hunters. We have a lot of rabbit hunters. We have a lot of squirrel hunters. A lot of guys that are primarily competition. We do some of the family pet stuff, not as much as we used to, but a lot of times they're looking for higher quality gear that's hard to find in the pet space, and so we sell a lot of dog collars, primarily to that part of the market. So it's really spread out. Like I said, I'm an upland guy, and my brother's a waterfowler, and so I tend to think of us as that, but that's just a small part of what we do.
That's got to be tough. You got to have a little discipline to remember those other markets that you serve. Isn't that tough sometimes?
It's more of an issue of making sure that I'm comfortable with the fact that I'm not a hound guy. And I don't try to be a hound guy. Now, I understand it. I have done it. But it's not what I do. And so I don't pretend to be somebody that does that. But the gear's the similar, and so I understand it, and I use some of the gear, that we have to do, but I don't try to, if someone comes to me and says, well, what do you do with your hounds? I'm like, well, my hounds are bird dogs. So it is one of those things that I don't try to pretend to be something that I'm not.
Yeah. Well, how long you been around, and who else is involved? I know I met your brother too, I think, at Pheasant Fest briefly.
He was out at Pheasant Fest last year.
Which must have been funny for him, all these people with orange,
Yeah, he's Rob's, like I said, Rob's primarily a waterfowl guy, but family business started in the early '70s by my parents. I grew up in it. It isn't what I always did, but I came back to it when my brother put them online in '96. And real early in the internet, we were always a small mail order company, and we had a retail presence. Sold a lot of dog food, and in the mid '90s, we got online. '96, late '96, early '97, somewhere in that neighborhood, and it got real busy real fast. And in '98, I came back into the company, and Rob and I have been involved with it ever since. We run it now.
I can relate, and I'll bore you with that story if it's appropriate down the road. But, that whole transition to an online retailer, if you want to call it that, I lived it and know it wasn't easy. And imagine for you, it was much the same. All of a sudden, you're drinking from a fire hose.
It can be that way.
What was the biggest challenge going online back then? I know your brother handled most of that, but you came in and you said, "My God, what have I done?"
Well, we had a lot of years of a lot of growth. So rapid growth can always be challenging, and there's been an enormous amount of challenges throughout the year, and there are. I mean, that's just part of being in business.
Yeah.
The biggest issue is that we deal with a lot of very large competitors, Amazon and Chewy being, the primary two. So you're fighting, these giant companies trying to be able to compete with them. And that's a challenging thing to do.
When I was consulting to other businesses, the real search we did for many of them was how to put yourself apart from them. What's your point of difference? Have you guys settled on one?
Yeah, I mean, for us, it's customer service and it's product knowledge. I mean, I think those are the two biggest things. You have a hard time. We've always kind of tried to put ourselves in between manufacturers and consumers, and educate people on the right products to fix whatever problems that they're dealing with. And that's we deal with a lot of technology, and so that's a big part of what I do. I spend a lot of time, trying to educate the consumer on some of the stuff that we sell.
And believe me, we're grateful for it because it's hard to get somebody who can interpret that stuff. And you're known in large part for that knowledge, product knowledge. And it's a two-edged sword. I remember the days when we were all transitioning to online retailing, the poor guys with just a brick and mortar store were afraid what would happen would be some guy would come in, he'd try a fly rod, and he'd whip the hell out of this fly rod, and then he'd go off and buy it online. Now there's this hybrid fear. Guys like you who are doing all of the hard work and educating and helping people to make their picks, but you're already there and all I have to do is click. Does it work that way, or am I just imagining it?
It can. I'm comfortable with the fact that I educate some people that don't shop with us. But that's just part of it. And I try not to spend a lot of time worrying about that.
Yeah.
I've always kind of felt like if we went about it in the right way, that we would get our fair share, of the market.
And that's again, as a former consultant in this world, I think that's all you can expect.
Sure.
It's funny. I got to tell you a quick story. I got a Facebook message not 2 weeks ago, and they said, I want to learn more about this product. And I think it was an e-collar of some sort. And I said, go to gundogsupply.com and watch Steve's video on the topic. So you're becoming you've been a resource for a long, long time, and it seems to pay off. Let's talk a little bit about trends in the world of gun dog oriented products. What are the big seller categories for you guys?
Well, I think the thing that I spend most of my time educating people on is GPS units. The ability to track dogs, with GPS units is a gigantic deal, in the upland space. We were talking just the other day that there are no longer any dogs alive that, were born prior to GPS. And I think it's changed things a little bit. My dogs know that I'm going to come and find them, so it does. I think it makes a difference in the dog. But, we've been dealing with GPS since about 2007. And so, it's a big part of what we do. And then, you've got the, primarily Garmin, they're the primary, largest of the, of the GPS market. And then Dogtra is in that space now also. Those are the two, that we do.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I remember the day Ted Garmin back in the day said, yeah, we duct taped a couple of our GPS units to a dog. And when they came back, we looked at all that and thought, hey, this is a pretty good idea. What is the biggest challenge people have with a GPS unit? You answer a million questions.
I think it's got to do with the fact that people, they're a little more complex than some people are comfortable with, and to me, it's a lot like any other technology product. You need to spend a little bit of time, learning how to use the system. I don't like for folks to learn how to track dogs, while they're actually tracking dogs, and so so that's a challenge where they don't. The system can be working perfectly fine, but if the customer doesn't understand how it's supposed to work, then that can be a problem. So, as much as anything, it's educating yourself on how the product works.
We said off mic, we're going to talk about another product in that category very soon, everybody. But off mic, I said, I have the chance to try it, but I'm waiting until the season's over before I dare open the box. If we can, of course, that's a great way to do it, and it seems to work. So I can't wait to talk more about that. But like you said, you sell a lot of collars, for example. What are the biggest categories for you guys besides collars and GPS?
You're talking about as far as other things besides like the technology.
Yeah,
I'd say the second largest category for us is actual dog collars.
Yeah,
I mean ID collars.
Yeah.
That's the other primary. We were working on a campaign not too long ago where we were discussing dog collars, and to me, just a regular ID collar with a nameplate on it that's riveted to the collar, that's the way we used to find dogs, and it's still probably the most important way to deal with a lost dog situation.
Yeah, I look at it as a fail-safe. We all should. Sure. And dumb question, but why I'm asking it, because others do too. You said a nameplate riveted to the collar as opposed to the jingly-jangly collar tags. What's your argument for that?
Well, some people don't care for the hang down tags. You're just talking about a hang down tag. That's attached. A lot of people don't like those because of the noise that they make. And people talk about them. They find that very irritating. That's not my concern. My concern is that those can actually get ripped off of a dog, especially a dog that's out in the field. And so I want something that's riveted to the collar. That's really what I'm looking for. And it's, to me, it's the most important thing that you can have on a dog. I don't care if it's a dog that you never lose sight of. I don't care if it's a dog that, I'll have people tell me, well, I don't need that on my dog. He never gets more than 30 yards away from me. Well, there's situations that are outside of your control, where things can happen. I had a guy that used to work for us, had a girlfriend that was in an auto accident on a highway, and her dog was in the car and got loose from the vehicle, and it scared the dog so much that that he ran off. This is a Labrador that was very comfortable with people, but had a real traumatic situation, and the only way they got that dog back was because of an ID plate that was on that dog.
Not surprised. In fact, I have a good friend, Rashawn Gordon. I hope you're listening right now, because I learned something from the story you related about somebody else. He puts his GPS collar on the dog when he's on the road.
Sure.
for the very same reason. And if you think about it, it makes all the sense in the world. I could either wait for somebody to find my dog, call my phone, and then maybe get to where they are, or I can just track the son of a gun with my handheld. Yep. And so if we're going a ways, sometimes I'm doing that now just out of.
I'm a big believer in any time I turn that dog off leash that it's going to have a GPS collar on. Yeah. I don't care if we're just airing out, and I'm letting him out of the truck and it's somewhere, I don't let a dog off leash without one for all sorts of reasons.
Yeah.
But nameplate's kind of the same thing. Something that we run into with people, kind of sticking on the nameplate thing is that, a lot of dogs are being chipped nowadays. They have a, and it's not uncommon to do with a puppy, and you put a chip in and there's a scanner that you can read them at the vet, or if they get picked up at, at a shelter, same thing there, they can scan them. I'm fine with that. I don't have an issue with that, but to me, it's not a replacement for an ID plate because I don't have a scanner, with me. And if I find a dog that I feel like is a lost dog, if I'm able to get that dog to come to me, I may not have the time or the ability to actually go to a vet and get that dog scanned, but I do have the time to call you, and say, hey, I've got your dog.
Exactly. I had that discussion on a chucker hunt earlier this season. I looked at the guy across the table. It was a bar. I admit it. And I said, the nearest scanner is 130 miles away. So, again, how long do you want to be without your dog, and especially not knowing what's happening to him in cougar country, for example?
Exactly.
Yeah. I know we're belaboring the collar thing, so I'm going to get off of that because we're going to talk about a new high-tech collar very soon on this. But everybody, that is Steve Snell. Yeah, we may as well just call him Mr. Gun Dog Supply. I know. He's got a brother and everything, but this is our guy, and we're glad for you. And you've done incredible service for so many people who don't have access to a big box retailer, let alone a specialty retailer, brick and mortar store. And that's got to be gratifying to you. Are there other topics that people are what are the highest rated videos you do? That's an easy way to put it.
Yeah, it's still a lot of the technology stuff.
It is.
Dog boots are a big deal. We have several videos that are dog boots. We sell some of the protective stuff. Dog vests, are a big thing. Primarily thinking about the upland crowd. Those are two really big. As far as in the hunting side of it. And then, we're headed toward. We're already headed toward spring. And we think of spring as training. And so, from there, it's, check cords and wonder leads and bird bags. We've got a new remote backing dog. Those are great.
I'm ready for a replacement, by the way.
Yeah, well, I was about to say, it's been a long time. We've got, bird launchers are a really big deal. And so it just kind of depends on what you're trying to do. But we kind of break the year up into, training and hunting.
Yeah. And does it follow the season pretty directly? For example, when we first arranged this get-together today, it was the heart of what I'd call pre-Christmas. Sure. But it was also hunting season. Do people plan ahead, or are they buying everything at the last minute? I forgot.
Yeah, we have a lot of that. We do have a good number of folks that do plan ahead. You can feel our shift. About middle of August, things start to get really rolling. But then you'll have folks that are buying stuff, at the last possible minute. I had multiple phone calls, right before Christmas where, hey, I'm leaving on a trip on January the 4th. What do I need to do to make sure it gets here to me at this time? And, that's, you got to be careful about that. Shipping during the holiday season can be challenging.
It's funny is that we didn't hear a lot about how bad it was this year. How was that Christmas shipping season? I think
it's gone pretty smooth, but I saw one email, today that was like, hey, I'm looking for an order, and and I checked it, and it's on the way, but it's one of those things that it was ordered before Christmas, and it's going to get there after Christmas. But majority, it looks like it's gone pretty smooth.
Good.
I would say overall.
Yeah, I remember when everybody demanded overnight deliveries. There was a point when Amazon turned us into robots, expecting that all the time. I think that's changed a little bit. You check me on that, though.
I think it's a little more reasonable than it used to be. There was a point in there where it was kind of insane, but a lot of it depends on where you live. As far as how close you are to a distribution hub.
Yeah.
And so it can be, that's definitely a challenge.
Well, again, Steve Snell, Gun Dog Supply, walks his talk. How was your bird season?
It's been good. In parts have been really great. I was up in Montana earlier in the year. It was real hit and miss, depending on the cover. We had a really great season in 24.
Yeah,
up there, and I was expecting 25 to be a little bit better, but there were some weather issues. It felt like primarily, and that plays such a huge role in upland birds. But I thought it was one of those. It was. For me, it was you find good cover, you find good cover, you'll find birds, and a lot of places just didn't have good cover, and most of that was weather related.
You say weather, but can I say drought?
Well, some of it was drought, some of it was hail, and so it's people. I think a lot of upland hunters forget that it's a 365-day year, and you've kind of got to pay attention to the weather throughout the entire year, and you can have great bird populations, and this goes for the entire country. You can have great numbers this year, but and things can go smooth through hunting season, and then people tend to forget that for next year certain things have to happen. And we have to have, you need rainfall throughout the year, and it needs to be at the right time, and it needs to be in the right amounts. And, drought is a gigantic deal, but it's the timing of it more than anything else.
Yeah.
And so you just kind of got to factor that in, especially if you travel. You've got to. Something can be great this year and then be horrible the next year, and you won't know that until you get there.
Yeah. In fact, it's funny, over the last couple of years, I've been warned off, Montana for this most recent season, and several times Arizona for Mern's quail. And, it pays to stay in touch with people who have boots on the ground all year down there, so that you can, like you said, save yourself a little bit of aggravation if you're traveling 1,000 miles.
I think you need to be careful about that too. I knew going and using Montana. I knew it was going to be a challenging year. Going into Montana, but that's part of the deal. You don't have, if you're hunting wild birds and you're expecting things to be, perfect every year, you're going to be frustrated, more times than not. And so that's just kind of something, and it does require an enormous amount of work and networking and keeping up with people and talking to wildlife departments and also understanding that things can look really good at certain points throughout the year and then end up not being that way. And so, that's part of it. And you got to be careful about managing expectations, I think, as much as anything else.
And you alluded to it, and it's absolutely true. If we know more than most people about what is good cover,
sure,
what are favorable conditions, whether it's a water supply for a certain species or the type of mass, the feed they're looking for, all of a sudden we're a leg up. But we have to study that stuff. Do you do it like we do it? I mean, or do you have a magic crystal ball?
No. No.
You're doing what we do.
There is no magic to it. The internet, going back to talking about, the internet has changed a lot, from a hunting perspective, and it's put a lot of pressure on a lot of ground because people have knowledge today that they maybe didn't have before. Mm-hmm. And there's upsides and downsides to that. We have the ability to track drought. The U.S. Drought Monitor is something that I watch on a pretty regular basis. I've got a couple of different apps that track rainfall. So not only are we looking at areas that are super dry, but we're also looking at areas that that they got rainfall, and when did they get the rainfall, and how much rainfall it is. Texas is a prime example. If you watch rainfall in the month of May, you can pretty much determine what the quail season is going to look like, assuming that an area has cover, and so that's a factor. And just because you have good rainfall doesn't necessarily guarantee cover, because that's a grazing issue. So you've got to be careful about knowing, that those two things kind of go together. And then, you've got other situations up. We hunt a lot of public ground in the plains states, and things can happen. When they have drought, they can have emergency grazing. I always go back. I grew up hunting public ground in Mississippi, primarily, and my father always preached that every time I went out, I needed to add a new piece of ground to my my repertoire of where we hunted. You couldn't just hunt the same places every time. And every time you needed to go, okay, well, we're going to go check this one out just to see what it's like. Because and that's just the reality of public ground. You can have a spot picked out and you can say, hey, this is where I'm going to hunt, and then you drive up and there's already a truck parked there. Okay, well, you've got to go to the next spot. And you've got to know what that spot is and what it's likely to hold, and the only way to do that is boots on the ground. Hot spotting is a huge topic, that people talk about, and you really have to avoid. There will be people mad at me in this podcast because I said the word Montana. Okay, Montana is one of the largest states in the country, and there are people that I will get people that will say to me, "Why are you even mentioning the name of our state?" So you have to be careful about that. We have great public hunting in Montana, the Dakotas, Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma. Texas is one of the few states that doesn't have public hunting, or doesn't have
not much
public ground, especially in the quail part of it. But New Mexico and Arizona. I don't typically spend a lot of time in Colorado. I've never hunted Idaho. I haven't. We were talking about Nevada earlier. That's outside of my out of my range. I would love to at some point. There's an insane amount of public ground, but just knowing that there's public ground and having maps or using OnX or any of those things that's just how you start. It's a constant thing, and thinking that there's an easy way to do it, there's just not.
No.
The first day that we were in Montana this year, we went to probably 10 or 15 spots that historically have been great spots for us. They were all terrible.
Yeah.
We put about 300 miles on the truck on day one, and it was just like, I thought the trip was going to be shot. Now, it was just a bad day. And that's just part of it. And the next day was a little better, and the next day was a little better, and then we kind of got it figured out. But
yeah, I like the idea, especially in a state such as South Dakota, where they'll provide you with a great hunting atlas, a hard copy and an online copy, making a route. And so when, like you said, there's somebody parked there, okay, that's fine, because we know there's a space 4 miles that way. And it leads to all sorts of fun stuff as well. I've met more people at four-way stops on those section roads who then
sure.
they end up saying, hey, that's a pretty good looking dog. You want to hunt with us? So it does work. But those insights are all very useful to us. And having a plan B and a plan C all the way through the alphabet always is a good idea. You mentioned Texas, and most of us will never get there, but you do spend time down there. And, how is that so far for you? I know the season's not over while this is recorded.
Texas is an interesting season. It starts in November. They've just actually changed the season. It used to be a little more complex, but now it runs from November 1st to February 28th. Texas is challenging because it's typically it's always hot, in Texas, especially in early season. And so I've had one trip so far. I typically try to get out a little bit more than that, but it's been phenomenal so far. Having a really good year. We had really good rains following up on a really good year. Texas, for me, I feel like kind of goes in a 10-year rotation. Typically in a 10-year period, you're going to have 2 great years. You're going to have maybe 4 good years. And then you're going to have 4 years that you question why you're hunting and why you're spending so much money and why you have dogs. And that's kind of how it works. At least that has been my experience. I've been hunting in Texas since the early 90s.
Wow.
And we're kind of the 15, 16, 17 season was something that I had never seen anything like that before. And we're kind of in that 10-year, we're kind of back around to it.
Wow.
So we'll see.
I'm Scott Linden. That's Steve Snell with Gundog Supply. This is the Upland Nation podcast. We're doing a special insider bonus edition here, talking business and talking birds and bird dogs more. We'll cover a lot more of that stuff coming up in the second half of the podcast, so stay with us. And then I'm going to ask you, Steve, about that new product that's coming down the pike that may offer yet another alternative in the GPS collar market. So if you want the first look at some of that stuff, stick around. We've got a quick message, and then we'll be right back. And this insider edition of the Upland Nation podcast is brought to you by cablegangs.com. Not just tie-outs, although that's how I got to know Brendan Landry and his team. They have roding rigs designed to reduce shocking impacts during roding from an ATV or a UTV, and maybe even a bicycle or an electric bike if that's what you have. They will custom build just about anything in that world or in the tie-out world, from a long gang to a single stake. It's all available from cablegangs.com. Superior materials, clever and much more satisfactory engineering and manufacturing. Take a look at their website, cablegangs with a Z, cablegangs.com, and you'll see what I'm talking about. They're my tie-out stakes of choice, and they will become yours as well. cablegangs.com. And if you're looking for that bucket list destination, look no further than heartlandlodge.com. Just like it sounds, heartlandlodge.com. In addition to great upland bird hunting and lots more acreage than in the past, they are now offering spring snow goose hunts along with an upland combination hunt. It's all available, and you can look at all your choices for off-season activities as well at heartlandlodge.com. Yeah, it doesn't get any more bucket list worthy than a trip to heartlandlodge.com. Welcome back to the Upland Nation podcast, an insider edition with Steve Snell of Gundog Supply. We've talked a lot about the company, some of the products. We'll get into more of the products, including that new GPS available. Well, we'll find out from Steve. And birds and bird numbers. Steve, you talked about a bunch of states that I love and a couple I haven't hunted yet at all. If you had to narrow it down to one state and one bird, where would you be going tomorrow?
Oh, I am. It's going to be Texas,
Uh-huh.
and it's going to be blue quail.
No kidding.
Yeah, I get a lot of grief for that. I get a lot of grief for that.
Well,
And oddly enough, I don't have a blue quail lease this season. I've had a couple of different. I've had opportunities on a couple of different spots, and so certain things just sometimes leases kind of come and go, and I don't have one this year, which I'm not real happy about. I started hunting blues. I grew up in Mississippi, and we have bob whites. And we started hunting Texas, and I clearly remember the first covey of blues I ever saw. I was up in the Panhandle, and we were hunting on a lease that did not really have them. And the blue range in Texas, or scale quail, they call them. A lot of people in Texas call them scalies. The blue quail range in Texas in the late 80s used to expand. It was much larger than it was, and they had a major die-off in I don't know if it was 87 or 88, somewhere in that neighborhood. It was before I started hunting in Texas. And blues are one of those birds that you either love them or you hate them. I find most people hate them.
I'm there. Yeah.
Yeah, they don't act like bob whites. And if you expect them to act like bob whites, then you're going to hate them. And they aren't bob whites. They're a whole different critter. And my take on blues, I started hunting blues in maybe 2004, 2005, something like that. You have to go a little further west now, somewhere in the I don't know how far you're gonna have to get, probably maybe 5 hours west of Dallas to start finding in the blues range. They're a tougher bird than bob whites. They can handle drought better. And they don't hold as well for a dog. They tend to run. You've got to have a certain amount of cover, to hunt them. I hunt them traditionally just like you would with bobs. I hunt them with dogs. I know some guys that hunt them out of vehicles and they run after them and that kind of stuff. I don't play that game. My take on it is that if you've got a bird dog that can handle blue quail, then he can do anything. There is no other bird, that will give him trouble. But,
well, they'll give my dog trouble, but that's another story. But yeah, I might agree with that. You think pheasants run a lot, go down and chase some cotton tops. But you said what we all want to do. We want to take our pointing dogs down and hunt these somewhat exotic species. What have you learned that if we're going down for the first time or the 10th time, how do we handle our dog on birds that are notorious for their running?
Yeah, you've got to have a little bit of grace with a dog on a bird that doesn't behave properly, especially if they've been trained on birds that do behave properly. My father bought a dog as an older dog once, and we hunted with her in Texas, and she was, I hate to say too steady, but she'd come from a trial background, and you had to go back to get her to release. You had to go back and tap her on the head to get her to move. And even with bob whites in Texas, that was a problem, because bob whites tend to run a little bit more in Texas than they do in other parts of the quail range. So you've got to have a dog that understands that the birds are moving, and they've got to have the ability to move with them, and that can be challenging. And it can be one of those things that a dog has to learn. And so if you're taking a dog somewhere from the southeast or even the Midwest, and you're going out further west where the birds do tend to run more, you just got to have some grace with them, because it takes a little while to figure out. It's just a challenge. I don't mind a dog that relocates.
Yeah.
If those birds have moved, I expect that dog without permission. I expect him to relocate, and sometimes that doesn't work out.
Yeah, absolutely. And the birds I've met in that species are notoriously rude to a pointing dog. And the poor guy, you're right. You just have to have a little grace with that guy.
It's not the same thing. And if you expect it to be the same thing, you're going to be disappointed. So
So if that's how they treat your dogs, why do you like them so much, Steve?
I just have an enormous amount of respect for them. I think that's the biggest thing. I have never, I have not hunted chucker, and so I don't know. I have been told that it's a similar experience, at least from the standpoint of a bird that's just super tough. And blue quail to me are just they're just really tough, hardy bird. And, they challenge you and they challenge your dog, and that's I just enjoy that. Sometimes I question that as a choice, and like I said, I've hunted them for a lot of years, and like I said, right now I don't even have I don't know if I'll even. I may see some next week. One of the spots that I'm on next week has some, so we may get an opportunity to see them.
Well, good luck on those. And yeah, chuckers are much the same way. And even the valley quail we run into out here move a lot more than you'd think.
Sure.
Pardon me. I must be. Oh, we had snow. I'm allergic to snow, so that's the problem. This is a good chance to you get this stuff before a lot of people, and here's your chance to show us one of these new products that you get to play with before everybody else. Tell me a little bit about this new e-collar and why you like it.
Well, so Dogtra has been in the GPS market for a number of years now. They came into the market. Garmin developed this market and has done just a phenomenal job with it. And a couple other companies have entered and left. Since Garmin came in, and I have. I use the Garmin products and I love the Garmin products, but we also enjoy having some competition. I think it's a good, healthy thing. Dogtra came into the market a number of years ago with the Pathfinder product. They're currently on the Pathfinder 2, and it's a similar concept to what Garmin has, but it's a different take on it. What they do is they use smartphone as the primary screen, and so the way it works, you're gonna have your dog's wearing a collar, and then you have a handheld device that communicates with the collar. And it picks up the radio signals. Let me back up just a little bit because not everybody understands how GPS works. But basically, your dog's wearing a GPS collar. It's getting information from the satellites that determines its location. The communication between the collar and the handheld is not through the satellites. It's through a radio signal between those two units. So your dog's wearing a GPS unit and you're holding a GPS unit, and both of those know where they are, and then they're communicating their location back and forth to each other. Well, with the Dogtra unit, that device then sends that information via Bluetooth to your cell phone. Smartphone, you can use an iPhone, you can use any of the Android. And so it's a little different take on it. It's a less expensive way to do it. In that you can save a decent amount of money because you're not having to buy a screen from Dogtra. You're using a screen that you already have. And so from a tracking standpoint, I've always been a big fan of it. It works incredibly well. But from an e-collar standpoint, I've always felt like it's struggled. And that's primarily because you were using your phone as your e-collar handheld. And using a touch screen as an e-collar device, to me, has just more problems than it's probably worth.
Yeah, and especially if you're wearing gloves, for example.
Definitely, and not even that. If the conditions are wet, it's just And the other side of it too is that the reality for me on an e-collar is that you need to be looking at your dog. You don't need to be worried about the device that you're using. And so I was never a fan of that just as a concept. We have a lot of people that use them and a lot of people that like them, but I just always kind of felt like it was a problem. And so what is coming out and will be out early January is called the Dogtra Compass, and this is the handheld, and what this piece does is it replaces the device that we've had up to this point that communicates with the dog. Now, it is a direction and distance device in that it has an arrow that will point and tell you the direction and distance of your dog. That is the primary way that it attracts, that it allows you to track a dog.
As opposed to others that have essentially a little map with a couple icons that say, that's a dog, that's you, this is, your relationship.
And so from an upland standpoint, maps, it depends on how you hunt, but to me, maps are not quite as important. I want to know, how far away my dog is from me. I want to know which direction he's in, and I want to know if he's moving or if he's on point. Those are the things that I typically want to know. Now, I love mapping, from an upland standpoint, because there's certain things that you can see and you can evaluate a dog. So you can do both of those things with your smartphone, with a Dogtra Pathfinder. But with the compass, you've got a handheld now that has e-collar control. It's got a dial on it. It's got 4 buttons on the sides. And it also gives you direction and distance. Now, if you want the mapping, you still have your smartphone for that. So it's a combination of the best of both worlds, in that it is a incredibly well-priced product. You're looking at $550 for the compass and a bird dog size collar, which is called a mini. And then you just pair that, on an app with your smartphone. And so it's incredibly reasonably priced, but it's got the features that I'm looking for in an e-collar, in that it has, buttons and dials, and you're able to use the handheld without having to look at it. So that's a big factor for me.
It sounds a lot like a Garmin product. I think it might be the 550 or something like that. Yeah,
the 550 Plus is a Garmin GPS tube style transmitter.
Yeah.
That is my primary handheld. That is the handheld that I use. And this product is very similar to that as far as concept. And so it'll be a competitive product, to the 550 Plus.
And plus, it's in an orange case.
Well, yes.
I love that.
I'll be interested to see if they offer it to us in some other color configurations.
Yeah.
I'm interested in this. I know it's not the primary market for it, but I am interested in this from the pet consumer standpoint. It's got some distinct possibilities there for the pet market.
Is that because it's so affordable, or is there something else unique?
Price definitely plays a role in that. We find there's some hesitation from a pet consumer standpoint, because you're $750 to $1,100 typically for a 1-dog setup. And so price plays a role in that. Size, I think, plays a bigger role in that than the other parts of it. One of my concerns about this product from a pet consumer standpoint is the size of the handheld antenna. I would love to see a shorter option. You're going to lose some range with that. But the pet market is not, they're looking for smaller. So that's that's definitely an issue. But the size of the handheld is very reasonable, from that standpoint. I love a 550 Plus, and like I said, I think it's the perfect dog tracking unit especially for upland. But it's big. It's the old tube style that Tritronics originally developed, and that Garmin continued when they bought Tritronics. And for me, it's the normal. That's what I'm used to. But a lot of folks struggle with it just because of the size of it.
Well, it'd be interesting to see. And by the time this comes out in video form, it'll be available, and that'll be interesting to see how it's received. Do manufacturers come to you and ask for suggestions? You hear from so many people every day. You've got to have a few thoughts in mind when it comes to product design and engineering.
We spend a good amount of time working with all of the e-collar manufacturers.
Yeah.
I spend more time with others, with some than others. It just depends.
Yeah.
But we've got relationships with all of them, and we try to provide that kind of feedback as far as what we feel like the market is looking for. This is an example of something that I would never. I'm not taking credit for this as a concept, but I talked to them years ago about going, well, you've already got this piece, put the e-collar functionality in that piece. And I was really glad to see, that they went that route, but I don't believe it was based off something that I said.
No, but you're absolutely right. I mean, it's just so darn practical.
Sure.
You'd think they would have started with that, but what do we know?
Yeah, but it is one of those things too that a lot of this stuff, even though we've been doing GPS tracking for it's approaching 20 years, it's still the concept is still very new. And there's a lot of things have changed. The technology in the last 20 years, a lot of things have changed, and so there's still a lot to figure out on it. These kind of things take time. It is amazing. If you've never developed a product, the amount of time it takes from concept to delivered is it's hard for a lot of folks to grasp. It takes a lot of time, and you're dealing too with some technology from some giants. And having to deal with that kind of stuff. Garmin is an enormous company, and the dog division is just a small part of that. And so you're dealing with a lot of things with a lot of big companies.
I've always wondered why they bother, but we both know why they did. They had somebody inside who was a real advocate.
I think that's something, though, that's a misunderstanding about Garmin. Garmin's a gigantic company, but they're a gigantic company of a lot of different little niches, and so you just got to understand that. And the dog part is a very important part to them. It's not the biggest part of them by any stretch, but it's a very important part to them.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people question that with Garmin, but I find it to be a very important part of what they do.
Yeah. This is a good chance for us to talk a little bit, maybe not about technology, but about other products that get a lot of questions, or people have problems operating. And I'll give you one perfect example. We both know about the Delmar Smith's version of whatever we want to call it, the Wonder Lead, the Command Lead, whatever. Yes. Hey, everybody, it's just a pig and string. If you're in rodeo, you know what I'm talking about. Sure. But so I called Susanna one day, Susanna Love Smith, Ronnie's wife, and I said, I've seen you guys use it both ways, like a slip lead, and then with the loop at the bottom, the Hondo at the bottom as well. Do you get questions like that on a regular basis? Hey, let's save you a bunch of phone calls.
Yeah, we do. We get a certain amount of training stuff. I am careful how much of that I do. I am not a professional dog trainer. I have trained my share of dogs, and I train my personal dogs, but I am not a pro trainer. So I try to be careful about how far I go, down that road. I was out at it was Christmas, and I was out at my mother-in-law's, and my mother-in-law does retriever, and she was getting ready. They were doing some shotgunning out at the country place, and she's got a young dog, and she was like, we had that conversation of what do you need to do about this young dog and gunfire. And I was like, let's not do it this way, So we get some of that.
Well, but more practically speaking, for example, I keep pigeons for training, and many people do, and I buy those. I forgot what you call them. The ones you could wrap a pigeon in, and it's got a cord on it, and it's red or. To me, it's red. To you, it's probably orange. Yep. Velcro, and you put a harness, I think you call it. Yep. I was so grateful to see a video from you guys on how to use the darn thing. Yep. And there are probably other videos out there. What are the dumb questions you get that you can solve right now for somebody out there who's listening?
I don't know if for me it's Bird launchers are a huge deal. That's one of the. I had a phone call last week that was like, "Hey, my bird launcher's doing this," and I was like, "Yeah, that's what it's supposed to do." Yeah, it was a. There's two major bird launchers on the market, DT Systems and Dogtra, and both of them have sound on them, and you set it, and after it launches, you still have a beeper function on it. And the beeper function on it is designed so that when you forget where you left the bird launcher, you're able to make the sound so that you can go find it. From an upland standpoint, that's why it's there. And but when you reload it, you've got to reset the launching mechanism. And so it's one of those things where it stays on, but it doesn't work. So you have to reset it. So it's a lot of stuff like that. From a hunting standpoint, it's probably dog boots. I talk to people about dog boots more than it's amazing how much I talk about dog boots.
Are they usually asking where they lost them?
Well,
that's my problem.
It's more of an issue of, okay, what size do I need for my dog, and how do I keep from losing them? Those are the two things. And we sell a lot of dog boots. I am a gigantic fan of carrying dog boots if you travel. I try not to boot dogs unless I have to. I avoid it as much as humanly possible. But I always have them with me because you never know when you're going to need them. And you can ruin a trip pretty quickly if you don't have them.
Absolutely. I'm curious to know what, it sounds like you've learned a lesson the hard way or two. You don't use them unless you absolutely have to.
Yeah.
Because? Well,
there's a couple of, for starters, I want dogs' feet to be conditioned, to be tough. I mean, that's kind of part of the deal. Now, it's hard to take a dog, from a really wet part of the country and then take them to a really dry part of the country and expect them to be able to immediately be conditioned to that. That's just not very realistic. And so we have, some of that where people are putting dogs into extreme situations for a short period of time. And in that, boots are definitely the way to go. My dogs spend, 6 months out of the year, off and on, hunting in a lot of different, kind of conditions. So I try to keep their feet, at a certain level. And, dog boots are not natural. That's not, dog pads are supposed to be tough and they're supposed to be able to handle a certain amount of things, but that comes through time, and conditioning. And so, and some of it's, how they're just, some dogs' feet are tougher than others. I had one dog who was a very, very tough bird dog, but I could guarantee you that the first hunt of every year, he was going to blow pads. He was going to, it was going to happen. And he would just wear holes in them. It didn't matter what you did. Didn't matter how you conditioned it. It was going to happen every year. And so after that, I'd have to boot him for a little while. And then 2 weeks later, he'd be fine. And then through the rest of the year, he'd generally be okay.
Yeah.
But especially if you're traveling, sand spurs are probably the biggest deal. I don't know if y'all have those out in your part of the world.
No, we got an equivalent. We call them goat heads.
So, the sand spurs that, and I've run into them from, like I said, from Texas to North Dakota. But they're one of those things that they'll shut down a dog that didn't grow up in them. I have seen dogs that were tough enough that they could run through them, but it's rare. And it's especially rare for dogs that don't live in places. We don't have them in Mississippi, so my dogs only experience them when we're traveling. And but it was one of those things that you can not have them for years, and then all of a sudden they'll just show up. And some of it, my understanding is that it's based on timing of rainfall and soil disturbance. But it'll shut a dog down. And,
literally, yeah.
If you don't have boots, you're done.
No, you can watch a dog and it will freeze and look at you, hoping you're reading its mind because it's begging you to pick it up and carry it away from all that stuff.
Sometimes that's the only solution.
It is. Yeah, they will not walk through it once they get to that point.
Well, we sell two kinds of boots primarily. And one of the boots that I like to use, we actually make these ourselves, but it's a Cordura boot. and it uses Velcro, as a primary fastener. You can tape them down if you need to, but you don't have to. And what I like about them is I just throw them in my vest. And that way I have them in my vest. And if we run into a spot and we can't get out of them, then we'll just boot dogs in the field.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
That's always an option.
Good.
And then the Lewis boots are probably the finest, upland boot as far as, from a bird dog perspective.
It's funny. I've only used them a few times, don't have the need most of the time, but you're not alone. Everybody loves those Lewis boots. What is it about them that people like so much?
They're tough, and they're designed for what you're dealing with there. They're primarily designed for they came out of Oklahoma, and they're just built for bird dog. I don't know how long they've been making those things. Probably 75 years.
Wow,
somewhere in that neighborhood. And they're just designed for that part, hunting in that part of the world. Especially Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas. They're just, that's what they're built for.
Yeah.
It's a rubber boot, and it's designed, for bird dogs. They're not the easiest boot in the world to put on. We've got a pretty heavy tutorial on it. Once you figure it out, I can boot a dog, like that, but I know the trick, and I've been doing it for a long time. So
yeah. Well, I want to encourage everybody who's got questions about this kind of thing to go look at the video library Steve's put together with his team. There's stuff, you'll slap your forehead, I guarantee it. At one point, you will watch a video and say, no wonder he keeps doing that, or whatever. Sure. Steve, we're getting towards the end, but we haven't really talked about one thing I think you're a master in. You are a road scholar. That's ROAD. Yes. You travel a lot with more dogs than most of us ever travel with. What are the most important things that we need to keep in mind when we've got 2, 4, a trailer full, and we're going quite a distance? What do you really, really make a priority?
Hydration, I think, is a gigantic deal. That's something that I think a lot of folks don't pay as much attention to. You're especially if you're going from a wetter environment to a drier environment. I like for my dogs to have access to water 24 hours a day. And then I also, I feed dry at home, but I feed wet on the road. Just trying to make sure that they're keeping up with their hydration. I think that's a big deal. Knowing where the closest vet is all the time, I think, is a huge deal. I never know who's going to get hurt, but I know somebody's going to get hurt. Barbed wire fences are the worst. So those two things are a big deal. Security, is another big deal. You want to have a vehicle that's designed to protect your dogs, and where you're staying, is a huge deal. You got to be careful about that. I think that's a huge frustration for people. Trying to put their dogs on the road. Yeah, it's a huge deal. And then the kind of same thing there. You've got to understand that it's tough on a dog. Traveling can be tough on a dog, especially if they don't do it a lot. So you've got to just be aware of that, and you're going to have upset stomachs, changing water. I like to carry water from home so that I don't have to change water, for my dogs. That can be a factor.
Yeah. We were both at mother-in-law's for Christmas, and the first thing I did when I was filling my dog's bowl was realize it smells different.
Yeah.
And that to a dog, it probably smells really different.
Oh, yeah.
And what that's going to do to their GI tract, who knows? Nothing, knock wood, but there are risks like that. Do you ever use a preventive of some sort?
I have. I think my experience has been like Purina has the Fortiflora.
Yeah,
that's a real popular one.
Yeah,
and I think especially if you don't travel a lot, that's a really good way to go. But it's one of those things that you've kind of got to start it before and run it through. So it's not something that you can use at the last second or after you have a problem. That's not what it's designed for.
Good point. And I'd never thought of that. But you're absolutely right. You got to. I mean, it's got to go through the system and start growing whatever those are in their gut, bacteria. Last question, because you do it way more than us. How do I kick this cough? No. the one thing you would offer us in the way of a tip about hunting with our dogs, could be anything.
Once again, I think a little grace goes on. It's the way the dogs experience the world is something that we really don't understand. And, the number of people that I see that get frustrated, with a young dog or with a dog that you've put into a situation, I know that there's a particular smell that game birds have versus non-game birds. I know that. But porcupines have a similar smell, and so do badgers. And so, there's, if you're traveling with a bird dog, you're going to experience, they're going to experience some things, and you're going to experience some things that you don't normally see. And having a little grace with your dog and understanding that he's experiencing these things for the first time too, I think is something that everybody could stand to just be reminded of.
Words to live by from a guy who lives by them and helps you every day. Steve Snell with Gun Dog Supply. I'll tell you, Steve, I've learned so much. It's great to finally talk to you at length instead of a quick email here or there. I hope to see you at Pheasant Fest again sometime. So happy.
I'm not going this year. Minneapolis, man.
Let's see.
I'm not going to Minneapolis in February.
Well,
I'm not tough enough for that.
You Mississippi boys have got to grow up and spend more time outside. But I don't blame you. If I enjoy the heck out of it. I'd be there no matter if it was in Anchorage, Alaska. But
no, I am a little too southern for that. I'll see them when they come a little further south.
All right.
See them next time.
And I'll see you there. Thanks so much for being a part of this special insider edition of the Upland Nation podcast. Have a great 2026.
You too, Scott. We appreciate it.
Thank you. And you, thank you for listening or viewing this incredible podcast with Steve. Don't get the chance to talk to the leaders in our world near as much. That's the whole point of these. And glad we could have Steve along with us on that one. Hey, if you did enjoy it, please tell one person. That's how these kind of things grow. One person at a time. Send a link. Just recommend it or play it for somebody the next time you're headed down the road for a hunt. If you've commented at the social platforms, that stuff is as useful as anything. We learn from all of that. We are encouraged by that. And that's why I ask those questions. And luckily, that's why you are willing to answer them as well. This is all made possible thanks to our sponsors, starting with Cable Gang's Stakeout Systems, Heartland Lodge, Mid-Valley Clays and Shooting School, Trulock Choke Tubes, Purina Pro Plan Sport Dog Food, Sage and Breaker Gun Care Products, and Pointer Shotguns. I'm Scott Linden. Thanks again for being a part of the Upland Nation podcast.